Yippee! Yay! Yahoo! I have spent the past 2 weeks reading One Piece. Did it change my life? I don't know. That's really hard to say. But one of the biggest discussions of all time about One Piece is the arcs. I wanted to make a tier list. I don't feel like editing anything today, so I wanted to make a stream where I just talk about my thoughts and feelings. I think for any good tier list, you need to have a best and a worst tier. Because I think this kind of captures all the stuff that you want out of like a top 10. Like, I feel like you do care about like what someone considers the best and what someone considers the worst. And then all the other tiers are there to like replace like the top 10 format, right? We're gonna go in order. Romance Dawn. So it cuts off at Orangetown, which means this includes Alvida, Morgan, Kobe, and Zoro. And I think that this is the most One Piece arc of all time. I think if you're like significantly better or significantly worse, you're like it's the exact middle point. It introduces the way that Luffy views everything. He's like a really simple but also like weirdly emotionally intelligent character, I think is how you would put it. He's like the way that he interacts with people like Kobe near the end, and the fact that like his interaction with the girl who makes the rice balls for Zoro. Actually, I don't know if Luffy even reacts to that, but Luffy is like a really good protagonist. I have a lot of bias towards him because representations of freedom in protagonists is something that I care about a lot. And Zoro is obviously a fan favorite, but I will say Zoro has one of the weaker backstories of all the Straw Hats. Like, she fell down the stairs and died, like, actually made me laugh when I read this arc for the first time. It was super goofy. The fact that, like, his backstory, like, kind of keeps changing over time as they put more emphasis on, like, Wano and the enchanted, or cursed blades. The supreme, excellent, and great quality swords. I forget the third tier, but there's also the fact that like the guy who gives Zoro Wado, is that it? Wado Ichimonji is like related to him as like cousins, and that gets brought up in like an SBS, and it's like, if that was important, maybe you should have brought it up like in the story. But the fight against Morgan is like pretty boring, and the fight against all the General Marines is really boring too. So I read the colored manga, and I will say that One Piece just doesn't look very good until, I would say, probably Barati. I think Barati is when the manga starts looking really good. So like everything about Romance Dawn is just like middle of the road. It's like, it's not offensive, but nothing stands out. Orangetown, on the other hand, is like actually actively annoying to get through in comparison to Romance Dawn. This isn't Nami's real introduction. It's like the introduction of Nami's like money gag, which is annoying. Like, I feel like the way I feel towards Nami's like money gag as like normal people do about like Sanji's like pervert gag. I don't think Buggy is really as great of like a direct antagonist and villain in his first role as like people make him out to be because of how he ends up later. Buggy in this arc is just kind of silly, but like not really too funny. It's more so annoying. The arc is paced like really slowly for how short it is. Like Luffy being in the cage lasts too long. I did like the moment with the dog. That's why it's not a D tier, because it has the moment with the dog. I like that moment because I like the little dog. Syrup Village, I think, is just a better example of like Romance Dawn type, where it's just he finds the Straw Hat and then he recruits them. I don't know, he doesn't directly recruit Usopp, which I think is a part of what makes Usopp so much more endearing in this arc, is that Usopp kind of directly tries his best, which is what makes them want him to come, as opposed to Luffy, who just looks at Zoro, Nami, Sanji, Chopper, Frankie, and Brooke, and Jinbei. I think those are the ones that he looks at directly and just straight up says to come with him. But Usopp is one who actually has to, like, ingratiate himself first, which I think is part of what makes Luffy and Usopp being, like, best friends so much more endearing, as opposed to, like, Sanji and Zoro, who, like, are necessarily as important because of their strength, but, like, Zoro isn't as personally close to Luffy as, like, Usopp is for the most part. And I think that's a very cool way to do it. I also just like Usopp. I don't really mind him the same way that most One Piece fans do, because I think he's the only one Straw Hat that's, like, kind of analogous to what a real person would be like in this situation. Even then, he's just crazy too. But I kind of like that. Everyone complains about the villains. I'll agree that everyone but the captain is bad, which is a trend. But, I don't mind Kuro. I like his, like, weird thing where he pushes up his glasses with his palm. Let me do that. I'm wearing glasses right now. But yeah, I like the story with Usopp being a liar to, like, help lift the lady's spirits. I don't even remember her name. It's been too long. It's not like a stellar arc or anything, but it's like romanced on tier. It's not bad. Barati is, I think, where One Piece gets good in a lot of ways. It introduces, like, random shit happening in the middle of the arc with, like, Mihawk showing up. It introduces Sanji, and I love Sanji. Sanji is probably my second favorite Straw Hat behind Luffy. The thing with Zeph and the Barati restaurant is just really good. The themes of the arc being, like, so, like, this is, like, something that I'm gonna paraphrase from a video I watched, but, like, basically Sanji is someone who, like, because he's a victim, he refuses to let anyone else be a victim in the way that he was, irregardless of whether or not he likes the person, which is such a cool way to write, like, victimhood. Like, even though he hates the guy by the end that he feeds, the evil pirate man, he still feeds him at the start because he refuses to let someone suffer, someone starve, because he knows what it's like to starve. And that's something that One Piece will explore a lot more in other arcs, and I like that it's kind of brought up here at the start with Sanji. Sanji's first backstory is definitely the best, like, out of any of the Straw Hats so far, because Nami hasn't really had her true backstory or whatever. And Sanji's is definitely the best here. The only reason Barati isn't an S tier is because the fight with Don Krieg goes on way too long and it fucking sucks. There's, like, one good moment where Luffy is running over a bridge or something, and he gets hit, and then he gets back up, and I was like, hey, that's cool. But then, the other 90% of the fight is, like, 10 chapters, and I don't have it in me to care. Don Krieg is dragging this down from S tier. Arlong Park is S tier. So, One Piece has a pacing issue where every arc from, where would it be? I would say from Little Garden onwards, One Piece has this issue where it'll cut around to different things happening. So you'll have one group of characters in this one section of the island doing one thing. Then you have another group of characters who are either doing something unrelated or fighting a different villain. And then you have, like, a wild card. And then later on, when there's too many Straw Hats, you have, like, a fourth group that effectively does nothing. And all of their stuff gets told to you, like, in a flashback later on. And because of this, One Piece has a really big pacing issue chapter to chapter where they'll constantly tell you things that just happened because they're shifting around perspectives. and they will just waste your time on that. And because there's only a few pages to accomplish anything, each individual story doesn't really progress in a chapter. So like 4 chapters that could just be each of the 4 groups doing something for one full chapter gets ballooned out to like 10 or 12 chapters because the Straw Hats have to because the story has to continually recap what's happening over and over. And this is like the biggest sin One Piece has, is its pacing. And later on, the paneling and flow of the manga gets obliterated, and it feels bad to read. Like the way the panels are aligned, the way the text is interspaced within the images, and the fact that there's not standout panels, like impact panels or double spreads that like are visually appealing. The process of physically reading One Piece is very annoying. It doesn't feel good. Like the minute-to-minute interaction with the page isn't enjoyable in One Piece. The biggest strength of Arlong Park is between the storytelling, so what all the different Straw Hats are doing, the fights, the character design, so like the artwork, the paneling, all of this is at its absolute peak in Arlong Park. The biggest strength of Arlong Park that's going to make it up here is that page to page, chapter to chapter, it's enjoyable to read. One Piece has a lot of storytelling to tell and a lot of themes to, say, but Oda is not a very good mangaka at expressing that. One Piece, if it was a novel, would probably be still doing better than like Game of Thrones, like the books, right? Song of Ice and Fire. It would still be doing better than like Lord of the Rings. It would still be outselling. It would still be at the top of novelization, right? And it's because One Piece doesn't take much advantage of being a manga. Like, most of the dramatic character beats are just words. And I know that you could say that about any series, but I think that there's a distinct lack of focus on the visual aspect of One Piece in the manga. And I think that Arlong Park is absolutely where it's at its strongest. Arlong Park is also weird because it feels like the fact that most arcs after this aren't as good is kind of indicative that maybe One Piece should have ended a lot earlier than it will. Which is something that I think applies to a lot of the post-time skip arcs, is that they are long for the sake of it. One Piece could effectively have been 1,000 chapters. And I don't think that's too ridiculous to say. Loketown, it's kind of a nothing arc. Like, low-key, it kind of nothing happens. There's like no major fights or anything. It's just like exposition. But again, compared to the earlier chapters where nothing happens effectively, I think that this is still better told exposition. Zoro and what is her name, Toshiki, and Smoker and Luffy, and all of them getting ready to go to the Grand Line, it is still more interesting. It's the most build-up arc I think that's ever existed, but it works because it's enjoyable to read. And then immediately after that is Reverse Mountain. I like the story with Laboon, but it's just even more set up for the Grand Line immediately after an arc that just set up future events. It's either here or C tier. And then Whiskey Peak, which is just an excuse to see Zoro fight Luffy and to introduce and set up Baroque Works. So it's like the third arc that's just establishing and setting things up in a row with no major payoffs or like climaxes or anything. And it's also the one that's weakest, and it like actively kind of has character regression because like Luffy just straight up trying to kill Zoro is like really, really weird and out of character and just doesn't make sense. But I will say that the Whiskey Peak manga is where the fights start to feel really good. Like Zoro's fight against Baroque Works is good. There's this one page where Zoro like looks to the left, and then because of the flow of the panel, the intersection panel on the top like slashes out of its bound, and then someone reacts to Zoro, and then the slash travels through the lower middle page, the big panel of the page, and it conveys Zoro's next attack. And it's like, that shit's genius. But like, that's not consistent in One Piece, and it really doesn't happen after that. It's like a weird stroke of brilliance. But yeah, Zoro's fight, especially in the colored manga, because I read the colored manga, where like the sky is blue and the moon is yellow. Oh my god, it goes so fucking hard. But everything else but like that little moment is C tier. Little Garden is good. It establishes, it continues to establish things, because that's all we can do until we get to Alabasta. But like, I don't know, establishing the giants is cool. It gives Zoro some of his scars, which seem to be important, except for the one on his eye, because we never got told what it was. It gives Sanji like his cool badass moment where he trolls Crocodile, and it foreshadows him by calling himself Mr. Prince. I like that. I do like Mr. 3 and Miss Golden Week. I like them more. I did actually like them, not just because they appear later in Impel Down or whatever. Little Garden is, I think, it's a little harder to read than Syrup Village or Romance Dawn because of the annoying back and forth cutting away to different things. But it is in this quality range. Drum Island is amazing. A man dies when he is forgotten is one of the hardest lines in the whole series. Chopper crying when he sees the fireworks that represent the cherry blossoms is one of the most touching moments. Chopper's introduction and storytelling is just amazing. What's her name? I don't know the doctor's name. The old lady, but I love her. Everyone trying to get Nami help, and Luffy actively resisting the urge to just run off and fight to protect Nami is like really good. The only reason Drum Island is an A tier is because I cannot take Wapol seriously, and he ruins the flow of the arc. It's literally just Barati. Like, it would be genuinely incredible if it had a better villain. And I don't care that Wapol came back. He's still annoying in a way that I don't like. He was just like evil for the sake of it, but then he like, that's fine for Drum Island, right? But then he's like playing off as like comedically evil, like he's funny, and then he takes up way too much time on his antics, and it's like he ruins Drum Island. But other than that, Drum Island does literally everything else, right? Drum Island is a fucking One Piece arc, except for Wapol, which is probably actually why it's more indicative of what One Piece usually is than S tier. Alabasta's S tier, man. I mean, what do I need to say? Crocodile, Zoro's fight against the second strongest guy. He doesn't have a name, and he's not important. He doesn't have, like, a backstory, because he's just the second strongest guy for Zoro to beat. Bon Clay is my goat. Nami gets, like, an actual fight. Usopp, like, has, like, his, like, Chad moment, where he's like, I'm not gonna let her laugh at Luffy's dreams. Chopper gets like his first introduction as like a member of the Straw Hats when he helps Usopp. Like, it's fucking goated. Robin gets introduced here, and she's like actually a menace because she's a villain. Even though when she joins the Straw Hats, she'll immediately be made an Oda woman. But yeah, Alabasta is goated. It's also probably the best execution of the idea because he repeats Alabasta in Skypiea, Dressrosa, sort of Fishman Island, and Wano. And I think it's the best execution of the idea. There's also the fact that it introduces a lot of characters who go on to be relevant, but like they're actually interesting, so it's not like just annoying setup or like, oh, I guess they came back. Like Vivi is someone that I'm actually actively interested in the current chapters. Jaya is almost S tier. I really can't stand the opening bit with like the fucking, we gotta dive for submerged treasure, and the fucking green guy on land who's like arg 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 arg. But other than that, Jaya is perfect. Bellamy, Blackbeard, A Man's Dream Never Ends. The fact that Luffy and Zoro literally just sit there and take it because they realize that the people they're talking to are such losers that they're not worth actually fighting. That fighting them dignifies them more than they deserve. It's so fucking... That's so good. The only reason it's an A tier is because of the dumb fucking start with the Nolan trio. Skypiea is... Honestly, just to continue... Honestly, Jaya and Skypiea are like a post-time skip arc. Split up in 2 arcs. Because like the resolution of Skypiea constantly calls back to Jaya too. Skypiea's... The intro is fine. And then when they start actually fighting, it just... it's so slow. I would say that like Skypiea would be S tier if the section where they go and start the trials to when the 4-way split happens with Zoro, the Knight, the Rebel, and the Priest. Like if that whole section was just cut in half and paced better, Skypiea would be S tier. But it's not. And Nell is super cool. It makes... He's like the next step of a crocodile, where because of his power set and his location, he has even more total control over his governance. And I like the fact that even though his ability gets hard countered by Luffy, he's still creative enough to come up with a solution to kill Luffy. So Luffy doesn't just win the fight because he's a hard counter to Nell, he wins the fight because he's like super creative, which is something Luffy has done consistently to this point. Like the way that he figures out Water's Crocodile's weakness, so then he uses his blood against him. Where else did he do this? He doesn't do it too much early on. I liked it with Arlong too. Well, no, because that ended up backfiring on him when he got launched into the thing in the rock and stone. But yeah, man, Skypiea, if you just like maybe completely cut the 4 trials thing and just make it so that the Battle Royale starts immediately and it's like a lot faster, Skypiea is an S tier arc. I think people hate it because it comes right off the back of Alabasta and Jaya, and it's basically doing the same thing with like liberating a country that's being ruled over by like an evil monarch. But it's just slower. It's also annoying that Robin, who was like such a menace last arc, just kind of like reads her poneglyph thing, pushes a guy off. I don't even think she kills him or beats him. I think he gets up and starts fighting again right after, and then just gets one shot by an L. It's like the boss when you unlock them as a playable character. She just gets nerfed. It's so sad. Longring sucks. You can make an argument that Longring Longland hurts the story. Not just because it's slow and boring, but you can argue that because it comes right before Water 7, and it introduces the theme of the Davy Bat game where crew members are fought for and lost, that it introduces this idea of team bonding and strength right before an arc where they all then suddenly just start splitting up. And it's like, I feel like maybe if anything, Longring would be better if it introduced like more insecurities into the team. Like if they made like a one-handed offer mark that like, oh, if we lost Usopp that wouldn't be as bad as Chopper or Robin, that would more organically tie into Water 7. Which maybe they do, and I just don't remember, because I watched it a long time ago, and it was so ass I did not want to reread it when I read the series. It's not very funny. There are silly moments. I think the issue is that Longring Longrand would fit way better like after Logtown or like Arlong. It's just like a silly early arc, and it's put right in between like the peak of Skypiea, which is good, and the Water 7 saga, which is like amazing. obviously Water 7 is goated. Enies Lobby. This is one whole saga, and it's actually done really well. There's not too much to say. Introducing the larger theme of like the oppression that the government does onto people with Robin is really critical for like where One Piece is going to go, especially now that we know like with Elbaf and Egghead. Introducing a bunch of different antagonists that all push the protagonist to their limits and force them to create new abilities on the fly is really cool. Ashura, Diable Jambe, and Gear 2. All of the different story arcs that are running on are actually interesting for once. So, like, you don't mind that there's, like, the Frankie thing with Usopp, and then, like, the Luffy thing with, Galileo, and then, like, the Robin thing with CP9, and then, like, Zoro fighting the Frankie pirates. Like, you don't care because it's all actually interesting, and it's all relevant. The fight with Luffy and Usopp is really good. And I'm glad that it happened here. That kind of thing needs to happen for the sake of what pirates are, but it can't happen post-time skip. So the pacing it here is like pretty good too. It being Usopp also makes a lot of sense because it drives the most tension with Luffy because they're like the most personally close out of anyone on the ship. And then you also have the fact that it's pretty understandable. And then Enies Lobby is just the direct continuation. I mean, this is just one arc. These three right here. It's just one time skip, like post-time skip arc. The Sea Train section is kind of entertaining. It's got some actually funny parts where Luffy is like getting shot at and he says, "They're shooting at me." CP9 is like whatever. It's like every other villain group where there's like the one tough guy that Zoro has to beat that's like second in command, and then a bunch of nobodies, and then like a woman, and then the big bad, which is Lucci. And like the fighting in this arc is whatever too. It's not too great, but like One Piece really doesn't ever have great fighting. There aren't many One Piece fights outside of the anime that I can look at and be like, that shit's peak to read. One Piece just doesn't excel at fighting. Which is definitely a flaw of the series. It's why I don't know if I would recommend One Piece to most people. It's an 1100 chapter shonen, but it sucks at fighting. But still, I think the character moments and beats all hit hard. Robin wanting to live is an iconic moment. And then you have things like Chopper going out of control, Frankie joining the crew, Luffy using Gear 2 and overcoming Lucci, Usopp shooting down the world flag and then getting Robin her cuffs. It also introduces the fact that Zoro is like kind of a dickhead, because he's the only one that doesn't really want to let Usopp back in unless Usopp apologizes. And I can understand that, but like combined with what he does later with Sanji, it's really weird. And it's like Zoro is kind of like a necessary dickhead because Luffy is like a good person, or at least a nice person. Thriller Bark. What do I like out of this arc? I like Brook. I like the Kuma stuff, and I like Perona. Yeah, this is like a C-tier arc, I think. The rest of it's pretty boring and not very fun to read. The anime is terrible. And it has the cardinal sin of interrupting the next stretches of arcs. Saba Odi continues to build on Water 7's theme of the government being really terrible by showing that like there's literally a public slave auction and that it's legal. Not to mention the fact that this also builds up a lot of other factors in the world, like the oppression of fishmen, which is important for Fishman Island post-time skip. There's the guy who calls Doflamingo and asks for help, and Doflamingo says that slavery is dead and this is the age of smiles, which is crazy foreshadowing for Wano. There's also just the fact that the action of the Buster Call getting enacted and Kizaru showing up and Sentomaru with the Pacifista is all really interesting. Rayleigh obviously steals the show. He's a goat. And then you get introduced to like all the Supernova, the worst generation, where you've got like Law and Kid, and they're there as kind of like Luffy's rivals. You get introduced to other characters like Killer and Bonnie and other worst generation members that aren't really as important or cool, which is why they're so forgettable. And then the fucking ending where everyone gets teleported away by Kuma is fucking insanely powerful. Luffy just actually absolutely losing with absolutely no chance is really, really powerful. It establishes a really good tone into why there's going to be a time skip. Like, it's kind of the first loss Luffy suffers, and like maybe you could think that he could just bounce back from it, but then like that's where the story, well, we got to get there, right? But it's just like, it's an exposition arc with things that actually happen in it to make it interesting in and of itself, and everything about it is enjoyable. The only thing that ruins Sabaody to me is, no, post Annie's Lobby would include Duval, I think. No, Duval is definitely Sabaody. Even then, that's okay. It's just a little slow. Amazon Lily continues to expound upon the Celestial Dragon's slavery in the world government, and it also introduces a lot of relief after the tense ending of Sabaody with the gag of Luffy being the only man on the island, but then being oblivious and not being like a pervert, which is really funny. I like that a lot. But then you've got Boa, and Boa Hancock is like one of the like best written characters in the series, I would say. Not likable, but Boa is like such a well written character, which is something we'll get to with Fishman Island. Because she's a victim of slavery in the system, but that doesn't make her like, she is a victim, but that doesn't make her like a good person. Like, Boa is like a bitch, just like flat out, and like everything she does is like selfish and like motivated by her own desires, and she's like mean and cruel, but the story still manages to frame it all without making it sound like it's her fault she's a slave, or without making it sound like her being a slave excuses all of those actions. They coexist together, which is like genuinely amazing. Not to mention Amazon Lily like starts to explain hockey a little bit, which I hope you like it, because hockey like barely ever gets really explained. Impel Down is then really good. Him managing to get Bon Clay, Buggy, and Mr. 3 all to work together, and then finding Ivanka and finding Magella. It's just all building up to him trying to get Ace out, and the scramble to get out once Ace is transported, and him meeting up with Jinbei, Bon Clay cheering him on as he recovers. It's not too long, but it's, goddamn, it's so good. And then obviously Marineford just comes in, and I think Marineford is actually kind of somewhat terribly written, or at least drawn. Like, there's like 2 chapters back to back of double spreads, but then all the action is still hard to tell what's going on. But it's just like, goddamn, man, it's like the peak. It's probably the peak of the series at this point. Like, the highs here are the highest, like, I think One Piece has ever gotten. There's too many characters. There's like too much happening for the story to keep track of it all on page. But like, I don't care. Like, it taking 3 admirals to take down like a dying Whitebeard, Marco just flexing on everyone, Luffy, Garp letting himself get hit by Luffy to save Ace, Ace going through the arc of like thinking that everyone should go away to get safe, and then accepting their help and realizing that he's loved, and like him and Whitebeard's final conversation where he thanks him for being his father, and like, it's so peak. It's genuinely just so peak. It's like that gif of Rayleigh like lifting his glasses and crying. And fucking goddamn, in the anime, like, the One Piece's reel is actually the hardest line in the entire series. Like, there's Roger's execution in the first minute of the first episode. There's Whitebeard's The One Piece is Real at Marineford, and then there's Vegapunk's The Truth of the Void Century Will Be Found, the treasure by the by whoever finds it. And they're all three moments that instigate major issues of change in the world, but goddamn, The One Piece is Real is absolutely the hardest line out of all three of them. The voice acting they gave to Whitebeard is incredible. I don't know how to feel about Ace. He's like a dipshit who like got himself killed because like Akainu said like your dad's a loser, which is like that's like something you have arguments about at recess, right? But it's like I get it. It's the same reason Luffy punched a celestial dragon, and that's like impactful, even though it's technically stupid to do. I get that it's the same idea. But it's just like Ace hasn't been in the story long enough to like ingratiate himself. Like Marineford is great because of everything surrounding Ace, like Whitebeard, Luffy, the Revolutionary Army being there, Shanks showing up, all of the different admirals finally fighting, like the betrayal of Whitebeard because of Akainu, and like Whitebeard's treasure being his family. Everything about Marineford surrounding Ace is what makes it so good. Ace is probably... If Ace had been, like, properly built up as anything more than just Luffy's brother, I think Marineford would probably be up here. But it's not. Post-war is just a part of Marineford. The flashback is okay. I want to hate it because of Sabo, but it's not this arc's fault. Sabo is other arcs' faults. But yeah, it's just a giant flashback that explains why Ace was so important to Luffy. It focusing on Sabo, though, is good, because it just highlights that Luffy, like, felt that pain of loss and never wanted to go through it again. So going through it again made him realize that he had to go and train so that he wouldn't lose his crewmate again from Sabaody. So it all flows. But, like, this stretch of chapters is genuinely incredible. Return to Sabaody. It just goes on too long. I don't care about the fake pirates. And the fact that the crew don't really care about meeting up again is really weird. They spent 2 years apart, which is longer than they spent together in the first section of the story. Like, Romance Dawn to the post-war takes place in like a few months. Like, this was a 2-year time skip they were apart, and they all just kind of treat it like they reunited from like splitting up on an island. There are just tons of things about this that never get properly explored. There's like a part where they're diving down to go to Fishman Island, and Luffy and Zoro start talking about what they were doing, and the speech bubble gets cut off so Nami can talk about like how salty the water is or something, and it's like that's just Oda literally just looking the reader in the face and being like, I don't care that you want to know what happened. It doesn't matter. I don't care. So fuck off. And it's like, no. You're writing a character-driven story. You just did a time skip, and you made the time skip in like the separation incredibly impactful and meaningful. You can't just gloss over the fact that the characters are coming back. It's like it's a little more insulting, I think, than longer end. Because like that moment actually spits in the face of the reader. Fishman Island. I think Fisher Tiger might be like the best character in One Piece. I don't think he's my favorite, but he's like the best character, I think. Going through the trouble of freeing all the slaves and freeing the human slaves too, because once you became a slave, it's like you can't separate human and fishman slaves. Being a slave is a slave, and he understands that. And that's so powerful that like he goes to the effort to reunite Koala with her family, and then in the process of doing so, the people that he returned her to report them so that they can be recaptured as slaves, which just goes to show that like literally no matter how hard you try, no matter how good you are, there are people that are just going to look at you and always see you as just like a different, right? An other. And the fact that they reunited Koala with her family, knowing that that would probably happen, and still dealing with it and never blaming Koala, is like so powerful. And then the fact that Fisher Tiger dies from that, and as he's bleeding out, even though he could use all the dead Marines' blood, he literally says while crying that he can't ever forgive them and that he's always going to hate them. And it's like, that is like the realest panel in all of One Piece. That is like actually the single best moment in One Piece. It's like so powerful. But then like the actual arc is like Sanji gets a nosebleed, so they have to like go around the island and like look for blood donors, and then the fight is just all of the Straw Hats revealing things that make it so that there was no tension in the fight. And then the villain is Hody Jones, who is just racist because he's racist. So it's like Fishman Island is like, it has the highest highs of One Piece, and but then like the rest of the arc is like some like thriller bark shit. I think that if Hody Jones were just a little bit more of like a character, I think it would probably be S, in spite of its flaws. But like, no main villain, the action is awful. They're still not really addressing the fact that they were split apart for 2 years and they immediately start splitting up again. Jinbei is kind of like a nothing character. He already became a member in Marineford. Like, that's when Jinbei really joined the Straw Hats, like, let's be real. And then he just comes back, and then he's like, oh, I'm gonna fight you. And it's like, the next chapter, it's like, I'm gonna fight you if you don't do it this way. And it's like, fuck off, Oda. Fishman Island was terrible to read, I will say. Chapter to chapter, page to page, it was annoying. But, like, I still think the Fisher Tiger flashback is pushing it that high. Because, like, the Fisher Tiger flashback is, like, a tier above Arlong Park. It's, like, genuinely at, like, peak fiction. But that's not the whole arc. Punk Hazard also continues with really good things about, like, the way that the children are being experimented on. It introduces Law as, like, a relevant character, because he's going to be relevant for the next few arcs. Caesar is whatever. I don't care about Monet. Smoker, like, fucking dies. It's like an arc where there's a ton that's happening and being built up, but, like, it doesn't feel like anything happened, and it was annoying to read it page to page. It's like, I think it's a better thriller arc. I don't have many thoughts about it. Dressrosa is awful. It's fucking 118 episodes. It's over 100 chapters. There's too many plot lines going on. There's like the group that's going to Greenbit. There's like the little people with Usopp and Ramen. There's like the backstory with the toy soldier. There's like fucking Frankie and Dipey Man. There's like the fucking Zoro and the second strongest guy. Then there's like Dressrosa, and then there's like Law's backstory, and then there's like fucking the Kingdom, and then fucking there's like the actual secret extra faction of people that follow Doflamingo, and then there's like Law's backstory, and then there's like the third guy that's running around that turns people into dolls, and then fucking there's like the other person that has to keep the factory, has to keep moving things. It's just like, it's too much. There's too many things going on. The Coliseum exists at the same time as some of these things, and it's like none of it's interesting. The only thing I really like in Dressrosa is Rebecca and the toy soldier, and Law and Doflamingo's brother. I forget his name. It's like Koraman or something. Gear 4 sucks. He couldn't use it in Fishman because you can't have him try all out right after the time skip, right? He doesn't need it in Punk Hazard because Caesar is like a gag villain, borderline. Except he's not, because he fucking drugged children and got them addicted to narcotics. Which is like some of the most evil shit in the series, but then he's like still a gag villain. So then he has to pull it out here, and then it doesn't work. So then there's like another stretch of chapters where Luffy is recovering so he can do it again. And then he beats Doflamingo, and it's like, it's just so boring. Doflamingo also just being born bad is like really fucking weird. Because like it kind of reinforces like reverse racism, where like Doflamingo kind of makes it valid to just think that the celestial dragons need to be purged. Because for some reason, some of them are just born like fucking maniacs. Which I feel like after all the trouble of Fishman Island, like that low-key hurts the story. Dressrosa actively hinders the story. All you have to do to make Dressrosa, you can remove Dressrosa and spread its elements among the time skip, and the series is better. That's why Dressrosa is so low. Zoe's okay. It's like a good exposition arc. The main reason Zoe is going so high, even though nothing happens in it really, and it just explains like why other arcs are going to happen, is because I read it after Dressrosa, and it reminded me that like, oh, One Piece doesn't have to be like fucking abysmally paced dog shit. Like, you can actually just read chapters and not feel stressed out because you know that you have like 100 more to go of this shit. I also like the moment with the Ninja Man and Momonosuke and Kinemon. I like Carrot and the Nami dog girl, and I like the two kings. I mean, it's charming, you know. And it's like meeting the giants in Elbaf. I'll put it like up here. I think it was more enjoyable to read than Little Garden. Whole Cake. Zoe was an exposition arc, so I didn't put as much stock in it being a good sign that One Piece post-time skip was going to actually continue to be good. And so I went into Whole Cake with like a lot of like expectation for it to be better than Dressrosa. And sure enough, it's better. The intro arc that establishes the area we're in is a lot better and faster paced. Luffy's fights are a lot better. It's not just in the Coliseum over and over. Oh, also, Dressrosa reintroduces Sabo into the story, which is like, fuck off, he died. He got blown up in a ship and died. That's like a critical part of Luffy's character. Like, Sabo being alive and taking Ace's devil fruit is just like, it's a double whammy of sorts, and it really sucks. But anyways, Whole Cake Island. The fight against Cracker is cool. Katakuri is unironically probably Luffy's best post-time skip fight. Before Gear 5? Definitely before Gear 5. Maybe with Gear 5 included. Katakuri is really good. And the pacing of Katakuri being the villain of Whole Cake makes sense, because Katakuri is like the Zoro of Whole Cake, right? So, like, the fact that Luffy is struggling so much to get past the Zoro kind of helps build up the Emperor's power organically, considering that the last major arc, a warlord was still the main villain and pushed Luffy to his limit. So it's kind of good that, like, Katakuri trains him to be ready for Wano. And it helps organically build up Luffy's power, because it's mentioned by Zoro and Rayleigh that fighting is the best way to get stronger, because Zoro mentions to Usopp that they've all traveled and fought, which made them stronger, and that by surviving all the islands they go to, they get stronger. And Rayleigh says that hockey blooms in the middle of battle. So, it's a really good way to organically allow Luffy to climb up to that rank. Not to mention the fact that Katakuri is an endearing character in his own right. I do like Big Mom in theory, but the fact that she's the first emperor and a woman, so she's like a gag character who's going through like pregnancy cravings on menopause, is like, it's kind of an Oda-ism, but like, I'm just gonna take Big Mom in good faith and say that she's like a funny character that's like evil. She's like the idea of Wapol, but like executed well, where she's like kind of goofy and silly, but also like menacing and a threat, whereas like Wapol just fails at that. Like, Big Mom is like the actual like perfection of that idea of there being a threatening villain that's silly and goofy and funny, but is also like actually menacing and just awful as a person. The thing with Nami and Zeus is really funny. And like, I like Sanji's whole second backstory thing where he like, you know, was like actually like his thing where it explains why he has the view of women he does, because the only people who ever treated him like a person in his childhood were women. Which I think is an interesting way to explain why Sanji is that way. And then the fact that Sanji, with his wedding with Pudding, where he manages to basically change her by just actually appreciating her is like, that's such a good Sanji moment. What else happens in this arc? Zoro isn't there. They all got split up. Oh yeah, Brook just randomly fucking tries to fight Big Mom and almost dies, which is kind of cool. And he manages to steal all the poneglyphs, which is like, badass. It's a cool moment. It's not character development or anything, but it's cool. Reverie. This is like dog shit nothing chapters, but it's 5 chapters. So it's like... I mean, do you really count this as just 5 chapters, or do you count this as like all the things that get revealed during Wano and Egghead? If you count it as everything, then it's probably up here, but if it's just literally the 5 chapters, it's like here by virtue of being short. Wano is the gatekeeper. If you hate Wano, I don't think you understand One Piece very well. Everyone who hates Wano, I'm going to say 2 things. I'm going to say that 1, most people who hate Wano caught up to One Piece while Wano was ongoing. Because Wano has the most episodes. It happened after a season break from the Reverie or Whole Cake. I'm not sure. So, because they started getting the better animator teams, they started doing seasons, right? So it happened after that. It had the most chapters. And because of the animation budget, the Sakuga from Wano's anime, this was the era where the most people were getting into One Piece. And because Wano lasted for years, statistically, most people caught up to One Piece while Wano was ongoing. Right? This is probably the biggest influx of new readers since, like, pre-time skip, right? So, all of those issues I mentioned with how it has to constantly refresh your memory on things that are happening in other areas, and how there are too many plot lines that always go on, and how everything is always just a little slow. You catch up to Wano, and then you have to experience that week to week, and it's like, if I had to wait 3 months to see Sanji versus Queen and Zoro versus King, I would drop One Piece too. Right? But if you had to read all of this week to week, no one would keep up with One Piece. Like, the people who do that are actually insane. Like, there are people who are so old and they like One Piece, and they literally are sad that they're gonna die before Oda finishes this shit because it takes so long. Sitting down and reading a chapter of One Piece every week, and that's it, all of this plummets. There is no S tier. There's barely an A tier. There might not even be an A tier. So I think that's why people hate Wano. The other criticism people have of Wano is that Luffy is now a chosen one, but he always was. The Straw Hat is literally a chosen one figure in the world. Not only that, but Luffy's similarities to Roger and him being a member of the D family have always been implied to make him a chosen one. If you think that the Sun God Nika coming out of nowhere and having barely any relevance to anything before, and only vaguely being foreshadowed in one Skypiea scene is bad, then fine, I agree. But, like, Luffy being a chosen one isn't an issue. He was always going to be a chosen one. What else do people complain about with Wano? Oh, what, the scabbards suck? I don't think so. I think the only thing that sucks about the scabbards is that they don't manage to actually hurt Kaido. That's the only thing that they did wrong with the scabbards. But I like everything about Wano aside from the issues I have with all of these arcs too. Odin is so goated. Honestly, the biggest issue is that I think Kaido is a fraud. Moody Gawa. I'm so bored that I have to jump off buildings. I have to jump off mountains and try to kill myself. And I'm just too strong that I need to get drunk so my fights are good. But, oh man, Odin's coming. Better take his son hostage, Yeah, I mean, oh man, members of the worst generation. Better team up with Big Mom. Oh no, Yamato and Momonosuke are coming. I better threaten to drop the island so that they have to focus on something else, It's just, building up a character as like a Saitama, like, strongest type, and then him being a complete and utter fraud would be interesting if it was played with, but he's played completely straight. He's played like he's this big, overwhelming threat, but I can't take Kaido seriously. You know what? Maybe Wano needs to go down a tier. The highs are really good, but Kaido is like a failure of a character. Kaido is like not a real character. He's like a concept, and then when he got personified, he fell apart. Like, the fact that he actually had to take Momonosuke hostage to beat Odin is just, like, so fraudulent. It's one thing, but then in all the flashbacks and the other arcs, Kaido is always like, let's go fight. Like, I got beef with this guy. But it's like, how are you going to beat him? He doesn't have a son for you to use as a hostage. Like, are you kidding me? Oh, man. Odin and the 9 Scabbards. I better make sure Odin boils in a pot for an hour before I kill him, just to be safe. Kaido is such a fucking doofus. The only thing that makes it possible to take him seriously is the fact that he knocks out Luffy in one hit at the start of the arc. But even then, like, I don't know. I think Kaido is dragging this down to A tier for me. Egghead. I love Egghead. This was the only season of the anime that I've sat down and watched completely since Water 7, and Enies Lobby. I think that's helping it a lot. A lot of the fights are just fucking immaculate in the anime. Luffy versus Kizaru, Zoro versus Lucci, whenever Sanji gets moments, and which is kind of annoying, by the way. Like, Zoro and Lucci have, like, filler fights in the anime that are animated with, like, beautiful Sakuga, but then, like, Sanji running over and kicking one of the elders is just not that well animated, even though it's canon. It's just like, come on, man. The highs with, like, Vegapunk and, like, the lore drops, and the, like, sprinkled in exposition of, like, Beehive Island, and, like, what happened way back when, and, like, Kuma's backstory, and, like, Bonnie being Nika too, and the revelation that, like, Luffy doesn't have the gum fruit, he has the human fruit. There's just so many things about Egghead that I love, and, like, the only flaws of the arc really is that, like, Usopp's group doesn't do anything, I guess, and then what else doesn't happen? No, I kind of just like the whole arc. It's like, it's just kind of peak. It feels kind of like a second Marineford, where, like, everything is just kind of, like, coming apart at the seams. And I really, really like it. I like the way that Vegapunk dies but lives on in Lilith. I like the idea that one of the Vegapunks sold the other ones out because they're all different people, but then the main one still figured it out and counterplayed it because he's still Vegapunk. Kizaru, Borsalino, his backstory being tied into everyone makes sense, and it kind of explains him as a character. He's kind of on the verge of being an Aokiji, where, like, he kind of can't really stomach doing it, even though he just did. So it's like Kizaru will probably become another Aokiji who defects at some point. The only issue with Egghead is just that it just takes a little bit too long to get through what's happening, but I mean, that's every arc. The anime really helps push Egghead up in terms of, like, the Sakuga that's being used. Elbaf. So far, I'm caught up to the chapter where Luffy just got, like, fucking speared in the stomach. It has highs. The first, like, 10 chapters suck ass. Once you get to Loki's backstory, it kind of gets better. Even then, I think there are, like, I think there's, like, 3 different flashback backstories in this arc, and the pacing is really slowing down. Oh, I forgot to say, because people apparently hate Gear 5, Gear 5 was foreshadowed in Whole Cake. Because Luffy never awoken his devil fruit. Even though Kid-in-Law had, and Katakuri had. So his devil fruit awakening was actually built up. You can make an argument that devil fruit awakenings took too long to be implemented, which I would agree with. I think that just, like, at time skip, we should have started seeing awakened devil fruits. Elbaf. Man, that intro section sucks so hard. Elbaf is, like, middle of the road. That is my thoughts on post time skip. No one came in. Oh, I didn't actually hit end screen. Bye.